Thank you. I got this lovely spot to keep you awake before lunchtime. So I promise it's going to be really, really practical and easy. Welcome to Port Elizabeth. It feels like my second hometown. And thank you very much to the sponsors and the organizers, and also for inviting me to come and do this presentation here. I just want to make sure everything is where it should be. Right, I added a little end there, which is really what it's all about. I'm going to try and pull together what you've heard to make it practical and that the message can get across, because if there's no compliance, it doesn't help that you did all the work. So to start off then, can you all hear me if I stand like this? It's okay. Traditionally our role was really to treat patients on dialysis, which is the tip of the iceberg. But Prof. Esty Forster says we don't have icebergs in Africa, so we should talk about the hippo ears. So if you're looking at the hippo ears, you can see that those numbers are very, very, very small compared to the hippo under the water that we are missing, specifically the stage 3 patients that we are not picking up. So historically, dialysis patients were at the center of our attention of all the nutrition professionals. But however, recent advances in the understanding of progressive kidney disease and its complications have resulted in interventions that can now slow progression, very importantly, and ameliorate the complications of CKD. So while dialysis has saved lives of CKD stage 5 patients, it's now possible to improve outcomes and quality of life of all CKD stage 1 to 5 patients. Since the complications of CKD, which you have heard a lot about up until now, are all amenable to dietary management, it has further expanded the role of dietitians in the care of all CKD patients. This, coupled with the fact that nutrition intervention is essential in the 3 leading causes of CKD, namely hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, has expanded the role of dietitians even further and made them integral and key members of healthcare teams. So, we experience many barriers when we have to educate renal patients. The first one, and I'm going to name it like it is dietitians do not seem to have the confidence to educate on the renal diet. Patients often seem to be totally overwhelmed by information that they did receive from the dietitian, and this is specifically feedback from private renal units. Then educating in the public sector and educating in private is two totally different kettle of fish. In the public sector, all stages of CKD are referred. You've got access to the patients, to the patient files. They come back for regular visits, and they don't have to pay every time they see you. You are also part of a multidisciplinary team, which makes it a lot easier. In private, the GP doesn't refer the CKD stage 3 patients because no proteinuria is checked for, or he doesn't realize how important it is to refer the patient. Then the poor dietitian only has one visit that the medical aid is going to pay for. So she packs in every single piece of knowledge that she could possibly do in that hour visit, totally overwhelming the patient and sending him home even more confused. So be careful what you do. The last thing with private is really that you might end up in a little town where there is no dietitian. And what do you do then? So to overcome all of these barriers, I'd like to briefly work through 2 case studies. The one is a newly diagnosed hemodialysis patient from the public sector, and the other is a conservative CKD stage G3B patient from the private sector. So I'm going to work through that using a specific tool, and it is available for you to look through after the session. Please meet David Ndluvo. He has never been for a checkup in his life. He has no idea that he has high blood pressure or any problems. He's never been on any medication. 46 years old, a contract construction worker. He presented at casualty with epistaxis, and on examination it was found that he had sky-high blood pressure. There was a lot of edema, and the doctor admitted him as an hypertensive emergency with epistaxis and edema. Doctor sent off for bloods, came back very high ureas, very high creats, a GFR of 14 and an HB of less than 10. Now those are definite pointers towards CKD. There was also metabolic acidosis and high potassium. And the sonars showed small echogenic kidneys. And this is not something that doesn't happen. It happens. I worked at Bara for 4 years. We saw this time and time again. So, poor David was told that he has got chronic kidney disease and he's hooked up to a machine and he has absolutely no idea what has happened to him. My second case study is a newly diagnosed CKD patient, stage G3B. Please meet Frank. Frank is 54 years old. He's a weekend golfer. He's just a little overweight, according to him, with a touch of sugar and a bit of high blood pressure. He's been on hypertension treatment and type 2 diabetes since 2010. You all know Frank. He presented at the GP now with being very tired and swelling, and on examination the doctor found a very high BMI, high blood pressure, edema, and 3+ proteinuria. So the doctor sent off bloods and it came back that there's high ureas, high creats, and he has a GFR of 43 mils per minute. There was metabolic acidosis and hyperlipidemia. So Frank is totally shocked. He has never ever heard that he could get kidney disease. He only has high blood pressure and sugar. There's no other problems with him. So Frank is really shocked. So is David. So where do you as the dietitian start when you have to see these patients? So I'm not at the patient, I'm at the dietitian. Please remember that information overload, whether it's coming from you or whether the patient is acquiring it on Google, only causes confusion, which leads to frustration and in the end, non-compliance, which is the one thing that we don't want. This is just to show that if you are in America and you are looking at patient education material, it's written below a 7th grade level. It's a first world country. So that is why I have got pictures to try and get messages across. We are in third world country. Please do not come in like a tsunami and hit your patient with information and terminology that he has no idea about. One thing at a time, one step at a time, adding up over time is what Health Change Australia says. So you have to sort your own messy head out first and get a plan. So prioritize general goals, and unfortunately in renal we cannot provide a choice. Prevent the client from being overwhelmed. So you need to sort your head out before you can sort the patient's head out. So trying to do this and getting across all the barriers and cultural challenges, which we'll be looking at a little bit later, impacting nutritional care, I addressed it by developing a visual tool through trial and error, 4 years at Bara, with a 5-step concept. And it's in the form of the manual, and it was mainly aimed at newly diagnosed, illiterate, non-English speaking CKD patients anywhere in southern Africa. But it works very well for literate patients as well. So sorting the dietitian's head out still, we are at basic level. You can't fly before you've taken off. So the manual is the take-off, it's not the flying part. Okay. So over a period of time, you've got to find out what the patient actually eats. You've got to find out how kidneys work and teach him. We're going to look at this in more detail. Then you are going to teach him what he can eat before you teach him what he can't eat. And then right at the end, when he's got everything under control, you're going to look at how much to eat. But that's a long way down the drain. So where do we start with the patient? Please remember that David and Frank are in shock. They are overwhelmed, and David is uric. He's got a urea level of 52. He's not with it. So you've got to start with knowledge, because both patients are unaware of what has happened to them, and you've got to teach them why. So generally, I would start with a diet history and then move on to how kidneys work. But with a newly diagnosed patient, I prefer to turn the two around. It's more important to first explain what has gone wrong. So just a very brief reminder what the kidneys are responsible for. They remove fluid, they balance chemicals, they filter and excrete wastes, they manufacture substances that control blood pressure, bone formation and red blood cell formation, and it's also a degradation site as well as a detox site. So that's just to refresh your memory about what the kidneys actually do. So what are you going to teach your patient? You've got to get across to David and Frank that the food that is eaten is digested, but it leaves wastes, which is carried in the blood, taken to the kidney, and the kidney is going to sieve. It's also going to balance. And it's going to put clean blood back in the body, and you're going to lose urine with the wastes. So if you're looking at that picture there, we depict the normal kidney as a sieve with nice big holes. Males understand oil filters very well. So kidney function then compared to an oil filter or a sieve. And when we're looking at Frank's sieve is starting to get blocked. And in that process, he's having chemical imbalances and some toxins are already starting to heap up. If we're looking at David, his sieve is blocked. His oil filter is blocked, which is leading to no urine being passed and the retention of a lot of waste products as well as an imbalance in chemicals. And the only solution is that David has to have dialysis. And this is what you have to get across to the patient, that this is what is happening to him. So just a reminder again of the 5 stages of CKD, and that Frank would be in stage G3B, which is from 44 to 30. And if you're looking at the pictures there, you'll see the kidneys are getting progressively smaller and the sieves holes are getting progressively smaller. We've got David right at the end, where the kidneys are hard and sclerotic and no urine is being passed. So this is the way that the 5 stages will follow if we don't watch it out in Frank's case. The next thing that the patient normally wants to know is what has caused this. And Frank wants to know, is there anything he can do to prevent it from getting to the end? Now, the main problems are uncontrolled hypertension, uncontrolled diabetes. With that, too much sodium, too big meat portions, red meat specifically, and obesity. If you push all of this through the sieve, you're going to damage the sieve. Please remember, the sieve was never intended to sieve sugar syrup under high pressure. How do we pick it up? We pick it up as proteinuria, swelling of the legs, very vague symptoms, maybe a bit tired, not easy to see. And then the 2 main things that Arina has really pointed out is oxidative stress and inflammation, which is a little beyond what I'm going to talk about, but that is very, very, very important. Okay, so just recapping then, we've got a normal kidney, a damaged kidney, we've got a blockage. What your job now is, you've got to tie the uremic symptom up with a culprit waste product or excess chemical that the damaged kidney is unable to balance due to the blockage. So the sieve is blocked, you are retaining something called sodium. Because you are retaining sodium, the body is trying to dilute it and it's keeping water back. So the patient will immediately identify with which of those symptoms he had, and you've got him. Because he says, okay, my legs were swollen, yes, I was coughing. And you've planted the seed that this is sodium and fluid, and that's why the blood pressure is so high. In the same way, you're going to connect waste, urea, which if it accumulates in the body, it acts as a poison and causes symptoms. The body is desperately trying to get rid of urea. That's why it's making the patient vomit. It might even push it out on the skin. It's taking the appetite away that the patient can't eat, trying to bring the urea levels down. And then you've also got all the neurological symptoms. Almost all patients just diagnosed has had irregular heartbeat, which is a sign of potassium being too high. And the itching and the red eyes are the short-term problems with excessive phosphate levels, but the long-term problems are what we're really worried about, and that is the patient's going to have soft bones and hard blocked arteries. the two things that we don't want. So, looking then at the kidney there, it's blocked, so the only solution is that we need renal replacement therapy. Whether it is hemo or peritoneal dialysis, we need that. But, very importantly, those aren't miracle workers. You need to eat the correct foods as well. And the patient has to get this right, because they think the machine can do absolutely everything. We live in a pill-popping society. If you have a headache, you drink a pill. If you have high blood pressure, you drink a pill, and everything is fine. So, back to the dietitian. You have to have the plan. Remember what I said. You can't have no plan and then think the patient's going to understand. So you're going to do a nutritional assessment and gather background information before you're going to do education using the 5-step concept. Anthropometry is beyond today. I'm going to have a brief look at some of the other things that you have to look at. Please always remember that when you're checking biochem, we have normal values and we have renal target values. And please interpret renal target values taking comorbidities and diagnosis into consideration as well. So the 3 pluses in green there would be the only thing applicable to Frank. The rest of the bloods that I put in will be applicable to David. So what have we got? Very high potassium levels, and in his case we can give K-exolate, but you will also restrict potassium. His phosphate levels are 2.4, which is the upper level is 1.8, and phosphate will be restricted, and the patient may receive phosphate binders. Your serum, urea, and creates are up, so you will have to adapt protein intake, and he's in metabolic acidosis. So that could be because the diet is low in fruit, veg, and fiber, so it needs to be addressed. The GFR is 14, we can't do much about that. Serum albumin is 30, and that could be due to the metabolic acidosis, as well as to the fact that he has a CRP of 5, which means that he's got inflammation. And that is, the inflammation is because the diet is lacking in antioxidants, and that was what Arika was working through with us. So this is the general things that you will have to look at in the biochem if you're checking your patient. There's also a clinical assessment where you're going to look for urinary frost. If the patient has got a urea of 52, he might have white powder on his skin. Otherwise, he might just be itching, which is another sign of high phosphate levels. And most of the other clinical signs would be due to fluid overload. If you are in a public hospital, the bed chart gives you very good information on blood pressure, what his intake and his output is, if he's vomiting, what his blood glucose is, and what his blood pressure is. Looking at investigations, the ultrasound images of the kidneys are usually done, but biopsy is not routinely done anymore because it seems to cause damage to the kidney. So kidneys in CKD are generally small and echogenic, and kidney size is in relation to body surface area. So there's no specific size a kidney has. It depends on the patient's body size. So that is what a sclerotic kidney would look like, and that is what the normal kidney would look like. So that is why on the ultrasound you can pick that up. Okay, so we've got this part sorted. Now we need to move on to finding out what the patient normally eats. So taking the diet history has many challenges. The first one was, when do you take it? If it's a long-term hemodialysis patient, you would start with step 1 by first taking the diet history and then explaining. This way we've changed it around. Language barriers. We have 11 official languages. 9.6% of the population, according to the census, speak English as their mother tongue. But that is the language that we use all the time. So to overcome language barriers, you can illustrate questions. This worked fantastically, because those things there, like prickly pears, are well known, but only by sight, not by name. And the patient can indicate if he's eating it by showing a yes or a no. Overcoming the literacy level problems, according to the census, we have got 8.6% of the population still illiterate, and 18.1 functionally illiterate, which means they've gone to school up until grade 7. So to overcome, we use colours, symbols and signs that replace writing. So avoid doesn't mean a thing to a patient. The moment you put it on a red background and you put a cross, it starts to make sense. The same applies for allowed. You put it on a green background and you put a tick and the patient understands. that also comes from the traffic light, the concept of red is good and red is bad and green is good. Then please remember that there are differences in food perceptions due to cultural diversity and socio-economic constraints. So next time that you are ticking off the breast and the thigh and the drumstick where the patient says he's eating chicken, just be making very sure that he's not having walk-walks or walkie-talkies or mantuanas, because most patients, that is what is considered as the chicken. Of course, on Sunday we'll have the whole chicken, but Monday and Tuesday you eat all the rest. Ticking off the lovely piece of red meat, yes, my patient is having nice red meat. It's mahodu, it's tripe, it's offal, it's skop, it's all the organ meats, liver, most of the time. It could be mupani worms up in, oops, just an okay will be fine, thank you. It could be mupani worms up in the north, but very, very, very sadly, red meat is seen as what you see there. So make very sure that you and the patient are ticking off the same items in your head as the patient. Most of the time vegetables would be in fino morojo, and that's going to be your vegetable leaves because they're freely available. Or it could even be edible weeds that is picked. And depending on the area where you live, tepe is eaten a lot here, which is amaranth, the reddish one on that side, is eaten a lot in Joburg. Electricity is a luxury in many households. So refrigeration and cooking is things that you have to think about. Next time you tick milk off, it's probably cremora or coffee creamer or something like that. So make very sure your patient is drinking milk. There's lactose intolerance as well. So lots of patients don't drink milk at all. Brick margarine, standard, because it doesn't need the fridge. A lot of food in tins because you don't need the fridge for it. And then cooking, if you're lucky, you have a 2-plate stove sometimes. It could be the primus, it could be the open fire. So just keep these in mind depending on which practice area you're working. African ladies cook from the heart with available ingredients using a hand. There is nothing like measuring. So portion control is something that is not understood. If you cut a watermelon on the 25th of December and you do not have a fridge, do you expect your patient to eat a quarter of a slice of watermelon? No. So there are really things that you have to think about. If he buys a 500 ml mass and he can have a half a cup, ubuntu for the rest. Meals, we eat 3 meals a day mostly. Most of our rural lifestyles and traditional African lifestyles are only 2 meals a day, which is a midday and a supper meal. It's often eaten from the pot as a communal meal, and it's often eaten with a hand. Pop is the main thing, and because pop has no taste, you have to supply a nice, flavorful relish, which could be very salty as well. Another problem. Thank goodness we have addressed the bread problem with the high sodium content, because a lot of patients were eating up to 8 slices of bread a day, and the sodium content in there is sky high. And then shopping is often done from the sidewalk or from the spaza shop. So there's not a wide variety of products available. And please don't get excited when your patient tells you he's using fish oil, because it is most probably recycled oil from the fast food outlet, not omega-3 fatty acids that he's taking. So taking the food frequency questionnaire, there's one in the file. And I would suggest that you use a food frequency because it's more important to know what the patient has been eating over the last few months. So, for instance, if you look at cheese and he says he's eating it on a daily basis, sodium, potassium, and phosphate is going to be a problem. If he doesn't speak English, are you all still awake? If you're looking at that food frequency, that's the easiest way. But if the patient doesn't speak any English, and we do have that, Shangaan patients won't speak to me. I'm a white lady, so they will not talk to me. So I have to work through the nurse. And if you show them these pictures, you can point to the exact part of the chicken and they can tell you this without communicating anyway. They can all speak Zulu, but they won't. So how do we continue? We have addressed the importance to know why they should change and what has happened to them, but now the confidence has to come in, how will I do it? And very important, the timing and the readiness, because if the patient isn't ready and the timing is wrong, you're going to repeat this message 50 times before anything goes in anywhere. So, we think in terms of nutrients. Patients think in terms of food. And you've got to get this in your heads. And we've got to be very, very basic. And that is why we reverted back to the 3 food groups, not even the 5 food groups. And patients understand bodybuilding, an umbrella works wonders in Africa for sun and rain, and fire is energy or heat. So the concept that you need all 3 of those things to be healthy is easy to get across. But a lot of things need to change, because that might look like a very healthy meal, but in renal quite a few things is to change. And to try and make that easy, I developed something to make the renal diet prescription easier, and it's an understandable way, a visual tool called the renal plate, which was specifically developed through trial and error, but it's basically for initial counselling. And the renal plate is based on adjusting the 3 food groups by making use of the South African renal exchange lists, KDIGO and KDOKI principles. And please always remember that it only focuses on the types of food, not on chemicals, not on nutrients or on quantities. But you have to start somewhere with something, and this works. So looking at the renal plate is then broken up into sections, and we will work through the bodybuilding foods first and emphasize white meat, legumes, peanut butter, the eggs, in preference to red meat. The orange section is the more highly available phosphate foods, which we limit. We will carry on explaining about energy foods, about protective foods, and I cannot stress the protective foods enough, because it's got the antioxidants and it's got the fiber. And then to move on to the left-hand side, which is all the nicer things, you've also got to teach your patient about herbs and spices. They don't know how to use herbs and spices. And this contains all the fruits and the drinks that would be allowed. Once again, to stress and emphasize the fruits and the vegetables for the fiber and the antioxidants, for the inflammation and the oxidative stress, also for metabolic acidosis. Looking then at the bad side, and unfortunately most newly diagnosed patients are in hospital, and they have got a lot of people bringing food in from home, and you cannot do a bigger treat than bring in Kentucky Fried Chicken, a banana, an orange, an inkumazi. So you have to teach them that these things are not going to be suitable for the patient. So unfortunately, this is just a very limited amount of things that you have to show. Now, Frank doesn't need to restrict his potassium yet, because we only restrict potassium when your GFR goes below 30. So in Frank's case, he could eat that, but David would not be able to eat those things there. We're also going to stress that the spices with the brown tops, the bottles with the brown tops, are not allowed at all. Only the tops that are orange, yellow, and green are good. And make them aware of all the condiments. You know how a stew is done. You start off with putting barbecue spice, then you have 2 stock cubes, then you add soup powder for a nice thick gravy, and then the aromat. Yeah, so yes. I never added any salt. Okay, sorry. And then at the bottom, there we've got all the takeaways, which are very high in the sodium as well. Once the patient understands the renal plate and starts asking questions, what about this, what about that, you can move on to the more detailed section in the manual where all the different food groups are discussed in detail. Only then you get to what not to eat. And now is the time that you have to talk about things like potassium and phosphate. But the only way to get the message across is to tie it up with the symptom the patient experienced on admission. If he's itched, he never wants to itch again. It's like ants crawling under the skin, and it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't go away. So you've got to tie up the symptom with the culprit. So once again, GFR below 30, you restrict potassium, or if the potassium levels are above 5. The symptoms you're going to mention, so you send the list home, because there's always someone at home that can read. but the list is translated in the manual into pictures. And illiterate patients will read pictures like we read words. And they will read, and stop. And where they stop, I can promise you that is what they're eating incorrectly. So they will never tell you, but they will go, and at the baked beans they will stop and you will know, okay, that's where the problem lies. Those are the high potassium foods that are the biggest culprits that I've found. I just want to point out the one in the block here, which is the soup mix. The legumes per se is not a problem, but soup is a problem because soup is extremely high in potassium. And you're putting stock cubes and things in, so soup on my menu is not available for renal patients at all. High phosphate foods, once again remind them about the symptoms. The phosphate binders, it's only phosphosorb 660 that you may swallow whole. Tums and Bical all have to be chewed at the same time while you are eating the food, otherwise it doesn't work. Bical and Tums were never intended to be used as phosphate binders either, so big problem. One easy way of getting rid of excess phosphate is the body will push out excess phosphates in the mouth, in the saliva. And if you make your patients rinse their mouths with lukewarm water with a teaspoon bicarb, and they can rinse their mouth as many times as they want to and spit out, you can get rid of up to 300 milligrams of phosphate daily. You will also reduce urea levels, and you will also reduce potassium levels that way. The second thing that is very important is that saliva of a uremic patient resembles urine, and taste buds cannot operate in urine, and that is why they have taste changes. So the moment you make them rinse their mouth with a neutral bicarb solution, you get the taste buds to work normally. Very, very good advice for patients. Irina has gone through this in detail. You've got to look at the bioavailability of the phosphates, and therefore we can give legumes. Seeds and nuts do have much higher available phosphates, but legumes, lentils may be given. When you're looking at animal proteins, your eggs, beef, fish and chicken, the phosphate bioavailability is 60 to 70%, but your dairy is 80%, and that is why we generally restrict dairy to a half a cup, or diabetics a cup. Big problem, like she said, is food additives, because we can't see it, we can't taste it, and it's not mentioned on the label. And food additives are abundant everywhere. If it's to preserve color, to make it available longer on the shelf, whatever reasons. So the high phosphate foods, those ones have to be controlled. Legumes are not a problem. If you swap legumes for meat, the potassium is also usually not a problem. We always restrict the dairy products, and those ones there are the biggest culprits. Oh, that ultra milk custard is death in Bara. And they eat it on tinned peaches, which are sky high in potassium. So it's a deadly combination. The coffee creamer as well, then all your organ meats very, very high in phosphate, and then the colas and the wines and the beers. So if they have to drink something like a cane, a whiskey, a brandy, and they've got to check what mixer they are using. But please, I'm not advocating that they must drink, because this sometimes gets across that way. It's not what I'm intending to say. So looking at high sodium foods, once again you're tying up symptoms with the problem. And in South Africa, we are adding 48% of the sodium during cooking and at the table. So very, very prevalent that you tell patients to stop using salt. South Africans are, in average, having 8.1 grams of salt. There's a brand new study that came in from Angola, which they did under medical students. And the average salt intake of these medical students was 14.1 grams. So, this is my other favorite slide. Doctor, I never add any salt to my food, I just ate this. But what the patient forgot is that industry added the sodium for him. So he just had a bit of cereal, a salmi, a packet of crisps and a margarita pizza. And that totaled up to 4,629 milligrams of sodium. He never added salt. So check what your patients are eating. Recommendation there. And these would be the biggest culprits, and I absolutely hate a white bread, ham, cheese and tomato sandwich, because there is nothing wrong, nothing correct about anything on it. So those would be the biggest culprits. If they had to eat a toasted salmi, chicken mayo would be a much better idea, or even a mincemeat one. So finally, when the patient understands all of this, you can consider giving him a meal plan. If your patient has got excellent albumins, his potassiums are good, his weight is good, there's no metabolic acidosis, his CRPs are good, and he's only used the renal plate and the information you have given him, please leave him just there. If he's asking for specific quantities, then you go into giving specific quantities. If he's a chemical engineer, yes, you give him a plan. And he will ask whether he has to cut the skin off before he weighs it or afterwards. Okay. So step 5 then, because measuring is not something generally done, I have tried to compare portion sizes to familiar visual objects like matchboxes, and just make sure that you and the patient have the same small matchbox in size, not the big one, because I've had that as well. So it's a very, very easy template. On the right-hand side and on the left-hand side, the portion size will be shown visually in real size. So this was what we used at Baragwanath Hospital with great success. So to summarize then, you've got to get your patient, you've got to understand what he's eating. I live in little Portugal in Johannesburg, Portuguese, Lebanese, so beans and legumes, no problem, because that is eaten on a daily basis. Maybe you live in an area where there's a lot of Chinese people, so you've got to take into consideration where you are working, so very important to know that. You've got to explain to the patient how kidneys work, you've got to tie up symptoms with the culprits. Then what to eat, what not to eat, once again tying it up with the symptoms, and finally, lastly, how much to eat as a meal plan. So I hope I have enlightened your minds a little bit and made it a little bit easier. I just want to do one more slide, and this is the ISRMM. If you are interested in attending any congresses in renal, please go and visit this website. The next congress is in Okinawa in Japan. It is 12,000 bucks to go, because you go to, you fly Emirates or whatever, but it's not that expensive, and you cannot get any better, I promise. Then also on this website, please go and have a look at scientific news, and you will see that I have got something posted there, which is exactly what I've been telling you about now as a PDF. We were asked by the committee, when we presented in Duisburg in May last year, if we would like to put our presentations on, and we said of course yes. And then excellent presentation on taste changes from Karen Manley, which I can really tell you it's worth it to go and have a look at. So always keep an eye on this website, because breaking news are the newest information, even before it goes to the Journal of Renal Nutrition and Metabolism, anything like that. So use that. And finally, my last words would be, please always work with 3 E's. I know you don't feel like that right now, but energy, very important. Number 2, enthusiasm, and lots of it. But never ever forget that you are working with a patient and not a bed number. So empathy must always be there. Thank you.